recently Atul spoke, and whatever we will have after our session, all of those are going to focus in one or the other way what's coming in the analytics space. So this is not the only session where you could think about what's next in analytics. However, what we thought we would do is really, think about and discuss a few dominant themes that we see. I've got a really very distinguished panel with me. We will deliberate on that. And before we get into the discussion, I would just say that in terms of logistics, we'll listen to panelists, their views for about 40 minutes or so, and then open up for any questions that the audience may have. So if you think about how the industry is evolving, data is the underlying theme for everything that happens in the analytics industry, and with data storage, data capture becoming much easier, much less costly, the possibilities of where and how analytics can be used have just exploded. I'm going to right away hand over to one of my panelists to say what is it that we are seeing in the marketplace, what new things are coming up. Maybe Vasant, if I can start with you, and then we'll go around the table hearing from each one of you on what are you seeing in the marketplace.
Sure. So in terms of the trend, which is in line with the topic that we have today, based on the discussions that we had internally, there are really 4 key themes that we see in the marketplace. One is the increasing all-pervasiveness of analytics, as we've already discussed. Apart from the typical industries which have been consumers and builders of analytics, we've also had domains like sports and election politics, etc., coming in and using and leveraging analytics a lot more. So that's one big key theme that we see. The other is the democratization of analytics that Samir alluded to in his speech as well, which is where there is a lot more power in the hands of the user. You have the best machine learning algorithms available on tap, open source, for users to come in and start building algorithms on. So consumers are now also becoming the drivers for the analytics that they're going to consume. So that is the second large theme that we have seen. The third is the increasing industrialization. Again, I think Atul alluded to that in his conversation, where you have a lot more automation that's coming in. You have a lot more of systems and information management, etc., where there is a lot more of algorithms. Algorithm economy was another term that we heard today. So the increasing industrialization of analytics, which is not just about scale, but also about the fact that the automation is taking away a lot of the work that people used to do. And the fourth really is that analytics earlier used to be primarily around the usage of statistics, but now increasingly you have computational mathematics that's coming into play, and that's where you have machine learning and deep learning that's becoming more and more important. So what constitutes analytics has also changed. So that's really the 4 key themes that we see. Apart from, of course, on a lighter vein, the other unmistakable trend, which is the wide abuse of the word analytics, but we'll probably park that for later. But that would be my opening thoughts.
Interesting. And Amit, you work across industries with different clients, small, big, new age, legacy companies. What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, I think if I have to define 2 trends there, it's only 2. The one is the pace or dynamism, which is way different today than what we have ever seen in this market space. And second, what analytics is generating to is a disruption. And both of them are fairly well connected. So when I say pace or dynamism, what's happening is the way we do business today is changing almost at a pace which nobody has ever thought of. The methods, the business models, the use of information, the use of decision making, the process of decision making is changing very, very rapidly. It's a 2 or 3 reasons underlying factor why it's happening. One, my technology is changing very rapidly, which all of us know. The life cycle of technology has reduced drastically, and because of newer technology, there are newer ways which are coming on. The second, which is again an interlinking method, I have far more information and far more data which is available today, which can answer some of the questions which I never thought actually existed in my mind before. I mean, I never asked a question that, okay, tell me what's going to happen 6 months down the line. because I thought nobody can answer it. Somebody was talking about in Atul's session, it's a Jyotish Shastra or whatever. We never thought science can answer it. Today, with a very good probability, I can perhaps answer it. We never thought that, oh, machine can by itself learn new things and can answer a few questions automatically. Today, it's possible. So the technology is obviously leading that change, but because of that, my technology life cycle has become smaller. My decision-making process is changing very rapidly, and because of that change, my business models, my business decision-making is changing very rapidly. So that's one part of it. The second part of this thing is whole disruption. So if I look at what this change is going to do, I'm actually getting complete disruption in the way the business is happening. And there are two angles to look at it. One from a business angle, and second from our angle, which is the data scientist angle. We're all sitting in this room. From a business angle, I have new business model. I have new decision-making processes which are coming into play. I have a far higher information. Somebody talk about personalization. Somebody talk about making decision which is slightly more accurate than what I used to make before. And that slide actually makes a huge difference in terms of the numbers which you will see at the end of it. The newer business models coming in. Had there been no analytics or had there been no numerical knowledge which can be converted into business decision, Netflix would have never come into this existence. It's one of the most valuable company today. All the new age companies, whether it's Airbnb or Uber and all run on algorithms. They don't run on physical businesses which they run. And you will see far more disruption coming into play. That's what's happening from a business angle. Look at from our angle or the data scientist angle, how disruption is coming in. Somebody actually asked that question, fairly interesting question. Will we actually have job 2 years down the line? If we do what we do today, or if we continue to do what we do today, 2 years down the line, we will not have jobs. And I'm not scaring you guys. I think we will have more jobs, but the jobs will change in their nature very rapidly. Because I need to figure out newer things to do. What I do today will actually become commodity 2 years down the line. And 2 years down the line, everybody else can do it. And if I really want that prestige of data scientist or prestige of guy who can find out new knowledge from all the information which is available, I need to do newer things. So somebody has to design those machines who will learn automatically. Somebody has to actually think of newer ideas which will come. Somebody has to think how will be the new revenue generation method will come. And not only on the positive side, on the negative side also. Take it from that angle. Till now, we don't worry too much about the cyber security or compliance. That will become suddenly a big thing for analytics, which we don't do too much of it today. Because so much of data will actually causes so much of data terrorism also, which will come along with it, whether we like it or not. So my business will become far more prone to data-related or cyber-related crimes rather than related to physical crime, which it used to happen. Means all of us had grown up saying that, oh, somebody came and actually took away the office supplies out. That's the kind of crime which we used to worry about. Now somebody will come and take the data out, which is far more valuable than a typical office supply. So I think those are the changes which are happening, and those are the trends which I see. I personally feel that more and more businesses will grow only if they can nurture the value of numbers and value of data which they have, and the data will actually move only from numbers to a far more unstructured domain. And second, I think because of that, the new business models will emerge, new companies will emerge. The entry barrier in the industries will reduce drastically, so you can actually open a company tomorrow and close it 2 years down the line, because after 2 years down the line, you will become redundant for that industry. I think that's the way trend's going to happen.
So very interesting, pace of change, disruption coming in, role of data scientists changing, and newer business models. And 2 years ago on a similar panel discussion, I was saying that data scientist is the hottest job in town, and today we are sitting here, and that's an example of the pace of the change, Amit, that we are discussing data scientists as it stands today. Unless they retool, that species is going to be endangered. So that's the kind of pace of change that we are seeing in the industry, and the need for adoption and continuous change. Interesting. Ujjaini, you run a hyper-competitive, telecom sector, analytics. What are the trends that you are seeing? What keeps you awake at night?
Okay, so maybe I'll start with a small example. So Today, if you lose your mobile, probably, or if you misplace your mobile, you can give a ring from another mobile and at least figure out where it is. When I misplace my spectacles, I think, isn't there possible another such way where I can just give a ring and I figure out where I have left it? So, there is a demand and supply, both the sides. So instead of focusing from the data science perspective, let's look at from the other side. The customers are the people for whom actually we are alive, right? So there are two sorts of companies or two sorts of way to look at it. There are companies who actually generate the supply which creates its own demand. And there are the other sets of companies where I know the market, there is a demand, and then we cater to the supply. So, it's about analytics is also on the same side. So at the end, I want to satisfy my customer. At the end, I want to, keep them loyal to my own network. And then what can I actually add value to their life, which will be really valuable for them. And therefore, analytics is utilized there, and that is the future of analytics. There is no point thinking what I can do and therefore do it. It's more about what the people for whom I am doing, what they require, and if I can cater that or generate new value add for them, and that is where the analytics actually should be used and actually being used today.
Absolutely. So, putting customer needs, solving a real problem versus solving a complex equation is what's going to matter.
Absolutely.
Awesome. AASHU, you work with a startup which is fairly disruptive in nature, and how are you seeing what's coming in? What are your interactions with the customers telling you?
So usually am I audible? So usually the kind of requirements that we see from our customers, most of them are very generic reports that they want, and I think any analytic tool that we develop, actually, like, we have a product that suffices that kind of requirements. But then there is a set of customers who want to keep their data safe, and they don't. So that is an asset for them. And they also want to keep the analytics tools or the algorithms that they are using to work on that data as their IP. So they don't want to disclose it to the market. And that's where they see that there is a reason for them to have their own ecosystem for the data processing that they are doing. And they want to have develop the solutions particularly for their needs. So they don't want to go to like Google Analytics, which actually share your data. So they don't want to go to those kind of services, but they want to have in-house solutions so that only works for their particular cases, and they can keep the right as well on their data.
Interesting. So data security, proprietary, what will my algorithm be shared? Will it lead to competitive disadvantage? All of those concerns you see coming through. Interesting. I want to pick on one theme and ask panelists to elaborate on what they're seeing. Samir spoke about it, some of you alluded to this. We are seeing large-scale industrialization of analytics. A company like Flipkart, when they're looking at billions of transactions and making decisions on the fly, it's humanly not possible to do that with even if you had an army of 1,000 analysts doing it. So there's no other route but to go industrialization, automation. What are the key themes emerging in that arena? Maybe if you can start with you, Vasant.
Sure. So I think industrialization is a good point to talk about now, because I think this has been referred to in the previous sessions as well, right? Where if machines are taking on more and more of the work that were manually done, where does that leave us? And as Atul rightly said, we will figure out new problems, new ways to be unhappy and new problems to solve. But I think it brings about a very important point, which is that what do we do as individuals do? If these are the trends that we see in the analytics market, as individuals, as people, professionals in the analytics space, how do we respond to it? And the answer lies in only one thing, which is the reskilling. As long as one keeps morphing one's own skills and one's abilities and makes it relevant to the industry as it evolves, till that point, there is a lot of hope, there is a lot of opportunities. Because industrialization is unmistakable and irreversible. It will continue to happen not just in analytics, but across all domains and across all processes. So that is a given, and since that is a given, the question really that all of us need to answer for ourselves is how do we respond to it? And in my view, the first key thing is the reskilling part, and how do we understand the domain and the context a lot more, which hopefully machines can't, at least not in the near future. At some point they will, but it's a game of always trying to stay 2 steps ahead. And that is one key theme that I see from an individual or an employee or an associate standpoint. From an organization standpoint, I think it's only good news because you can now answer a lot more questions that you had, which was always difficult to figure out. And it's the cost of experimentation is now dropping, by the month, by the year. So for companies, the news is a lot better than for individuals. That is my personal view.
Yeah. And that also brings the focus on the whole service model versus product-centric view. Amit, if you want to take a stab at how you're seeing product versus services debate, and what are companies doing, what's the future looking there?
Right. I think if I add to what Vasant said and what you are trying to say, I don't think there's a debate between product and services. And the reason why I say so, I don't think only product will survive. I don't think only services will survive. What we are actually moving to is a kind of a hybrid which is available now, which is a product and a service. Also, with the evolution which is happening and the industrialization which is happening, it in no way endanger the services component. Right? If you take any industry, analytics is not the only industry where industrialization is happening. There are a lot of industries that happen. You can take something very simple. You can take as simple as transportation. When the wheel got invented, there were very few drivers who used to drive bullock cart, and people used to go in that. And there were people who were doing it, and that was a speed of whatever, 3 km/h or 5 km/h. People industrialize it, it moves to the newer level of advancement. People drive cars today at whatever, 100 km/h or 80 km/h. People are now talking about bullet trains which will move even faster. 3 things to look at that kind of thing. Whenever the industrialization happens, the 3 changes happen in the ecology or ecological system which works with that. One, the use of that particular technology or use of that particular feature becomes far more pervasive. So initially only 10 people used to go on wheels in any form of wheels. Today maybe 30% people goes on wheels. As more and more industrialization will happen, it will in the reach of maybe 50% of the population of the world. So the reach will become bigger. So today, as the analytics will get more and more industrialized, today maybe only 10% of corporates uses it effectively or some level of effectiveness. But as it will happen more and more industrialized, the more corporates will start using it, which basically means that you will need more analytics per se. You will need more people who can do that. You will need more solutions who can solve the problems rather than reduce it in any way. So it's good news for companies. It's good news for all of us sitting in this room. That's one part. Second part is the human beings, we all are human beings, we have a huge growth. So something which becomes normal for us actually become bored, and we start looking at the next level of questions. So that's the reason when 3 km/h speed was not acceptable to us, we moved to 20 km/h, then we moved to 50 km/h, and now talking about supersonic speed. I'm sure once we reach that, there will be something else we will start talking about. Right? The same thing in analytics. So today, when we start doing something which is fairly basic insights from the data which we have, to something slightly more complex, to something which is more machine-driven, which Vasant talked about. Once we reach there, we are still not there. Once we reach there, something else will start probing our mind, and we will start thinking about the next level of stuff. So that curiosity or that ability to innovate or move ahead will not stop us, and that's why perhaps machine will never fully overtake it. I think that's the other thing. The third thing is, which Vasant actually said about domain knowledge of the machine. Machine can learn few things, but those learning in machine can actually is something which we know, and we can automate it up to some extent into that machine. Beyond that, there's so many other factors which are happening in the environment, which perhaps we can observe, machine can't observe. So there has to be always a combination of machine plus a human which is going to work in the future. What has happened is till now we have only focused, or at least in India as the industry evolved, we have only focused on the human element. We somehow not focused on the machine element. The machine element has become slightly more dominant and slightly more talk of the town in the last couple of years. My sense is they will actually merge fairly intelligently. There will be a decent hybrid creature which will get created. Even from a service provider perspective, we will have more hybrid service to the client. Even from the client perspective, we will have far more hybrid services to buy, because the client, as my co-panelist actually said, client is more interested in outcome. Client has its own need of its customer which he wants to solve for. It does not interest whether you give it through a machine or through a manual channel. I'm only looking at that this is my need, and will this whole composition of an hybrid or non-hybrid solve that need or not, or solve that answer or not. And I think that's where it will go to. And I'm sure when we come to Jayani, he will talk about it, because telecom is one of the industry which actually started using machine far earlier than any other industry, which driven machine learning, machine-driven analytics far quickly in terms of cycle. And she will perhaps talk about it, that perhaps only machine is not enough to solve the problem.
Right. So product and services coexisting, synergies between machine and man, essentially collaboration. Machine can do computation, but you need cognition, which is going to come from analyst or human being in there. You spoke a very interesting concept of adoption. Something new comes up, it's used by 1% of people, early adopters, then gets more 10%, 20, 30, and then inflection point, it becomes business as usual. Right? Everywhere we are seeing that companies are wanting to put more analytical output in the hands of the end user, and some of us call that democratization of analytics. Some of us call that making it more pervasive. I want to hear from some of you on the panel. What is it that you're seeing in terms of decision making and analytics in the hands of the end user versus a trained analyst, and how does that impact the analytics ecosystem as we see that today? So maybe one of you should pick that up.
So if you see, like you said that end users have had that power. So if you see the analytics tools like Tableau or ClickView, so really the end user can decide that what kind of data he wants to use and what kind of basic outcome he wants to see. So he can use those kinds of tools, and also like if the user is like more into that I want to run my business, so I want to see that how my business is doing on real time. So they are more focused about that how I can see the reports quickly. How can I see that how my data is changing quickly? So they are more into that real-time reporting now, instead of getting the outcome after a week or a month. So they are actually, like Amit said, that they are moving to predictive and prescriptive analytics rather than diagnostic and descriptive. So that is, I think, that is what we are seeing.
I would suggest a little difference, because I think the earlier, at least couple of, I think till last year I have seen the question was who is the end user and who should be the decision maker. I think it is changing more towards a collaborative structure. It is not just the business users or the CEO, CMO, they actually take the decision. It's more of a project and a group who takes the decision. So for example, even if I give the Tableau to the end user's hand, I really do not know what insight he will actually take out and whether that is really the right insight given that kind of data. So it is actually more of a collaborative sense where the data scientist, the end business users like the CMO who is designing the marketing propositions, the person who is actually taking care of the operation of it, the person who is actually designing the go-to market, the salespeople, all together actually sit together and decide that what should be the final outcome of it. So decision making is not actually in one particular group's hand, it is more of a collaborative structure in the recent industries.
Yeah. And I think just to add, the continuation of the discussion, I think there are, earlier it used to always be about solving a problem, and that does not go away. Obviously we need to use more and more of information, data and analytics to solve problems. But what is also happening now is with the increasing amount of data and the analytics that's already happening on it is one identifies a lot of uses of that knowledge and that data and that information, which may not necessarily solve a problem, but may aid you in your own life, as an individual, as an example. So Google started as a pure search engine. It collected over years, it collected a vast volume of data, and then it uses that data to do a lot of analytics on the individual and gives that information back. So today you know a lot of what you did even a week back. If there was something that you want to go back to, that entire history is provided by Google. That was not necessarily a problem that we all had as an individual or say companies. But the beauty is that that information allows us to define newer uses of that data and the analytics. And I think that is where it really gets interesting, right? It's not just the demand side, but the supply side has now a life of its own and has a meaning of its own, and one can define new uses, right? Just as Steve Jobs very famously said that he doesn't do focus groups because customers don't know what they want, and I'm creating something for them. I think the data and analytics creates that kind of environment, and that is what makes it really interesting.
The discovery side of the analytics is actually picking up much more. A couple of, I think, weeks back, I was in another conference where, rightly one person put together. Most of the time, we actually do the postmortem of the data, which is more diagnostic. I do not know, how do I actually discover something out of my data? And I think this discovery science is picking up more from the data analytics side instead of the postmortem, diagnostic, and therefore what to do type of thing. So problem solving you can do only when you know what is the problem. Many a time we don't know the problem, so let's discover what it is and how can I cater to that.
So I think understanding the patterns in the data is what is more important. So we have a huge data now. I mean, everybody, and we are making it even on a larger scale now. So understanding that data and actually looking into that what we want to read from that data is what is more important than just having a big thing.
Absolutely. So collaborative teams, joint decision making, and just as an insight, what I'm seeing happening quite a lot is while we have a lot of data and insights available to us, how do we upskill the entire organization? Because now there is a person who is going to be expert in sales, he or she has to interpret that data. Somebody who is expert in finance has to come up to the level of interpreting and making important inferences from that. So in general, the business processes and the awareness about analytics, and in one word I call that analytical quotient of the business unit or the company. We have all heard about emotional quotient, how that helps us make decisions. I think the next frontier is going to be the analytical quotient of your business unit or the company, and everyone in the company has to come up to a certain level to be able to leverage and do the discovery which is out there in the data to make it useful for the company.
So from an organization standpoint, to continue your thought, is to bring everybody up that analytics quotient. One doesn't need to be an analytics professional.
Absolutely.
Right? The plumbing behind all the work that goes on is not something that individuals need to know necessarily, which is where the democratization point comes in, which is that a lot of this is already available as pre-built libraries, open source. You can go to the web and download it. So, and one doesn't really need to know how it works. The question is, if everyone knows how to apply it, then the analytics quotient of the organization comes up on its own.
Yeah. And also the interest to apply it. It's not just knowing. I think even before that, the interest to apply it. I have seen many organizations where they, data science group is very secluded and work in silos, and for them, okay, I understand you are saying this, but current business proposition is this, that is my priority, let's do that. But if that goes on happening, then the analytic quotient of that company can never goes high. On the other hand, if everybody, starting from the top leadership to the bottom line people, if everybody has the inquisitiveness of understanding data, what the data-driven insight is talking to me, then the analytic quotient is actually going to go high.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, I want to pick up a couple of other topics for our panelists to sort of talk to us about. So much of possibilities with analytics. How is an organization today thinking about putting their money? I have, at the end of the day, as a general manager of a business, I have an only limited amount of investment to make. How is the decisioning around what should be done and what should not be done? How is that changing with everything becoming possible today?
Right. So let me just take a stab on. I think it's a fairly interesting way to look at it, and that will also perhaps, in a way, conflict with the earlier discussion we were having in terms of discovery and problem solving. So if I'm a business leader and if I'm looking at it from a business perspective, what I look at it is more from an ROI perspective. And when I look at from an ROI perspective, a problem solver or problem solving approach always gives me a better ROI than a discovery approach. So where is the money going? I think a large chunk of money which is going in the problem solving side of analytics rather than discovery side. I think that's part one. The part two is, and which all of us perhaps in this room appreciate, the technology behind analytics and the plumbing and getting the data and getting the dashboard and the technology is perhaps the easiest part of analytics lifecycle. Right? The two most difficult part of the analytics part is one, to figure out what I'm trying to do. So like what I said, can I define the problem well? Can I actually ask the right question? Can I link it to the business problem or the client problem so well that I can actually go and do the right plumbing? Because if I don't define it well, I will end up doing it wrong. That's one of the most difficult part. And perhaps the second other bigger difficult part is I have done all kind of statistics and mathematics and computing on that. I got some output. How am I going to use it? If it's not used, I will never get an ROI. Unfortunately, what has happened is the science has always been considered to be more innovative. So the plumbing part or the middle part is more science driven, and there's a lot of research and a lot of investment has gone into that. There's a lot of innovation which has gone into that. There's a very little effort which is made to make it as a part of process. So very, very few organizations can define their problem correctly, even if it's a discovery problem. There are very, very few organizations or data sciences team actually able to figure out, now this is my output, how I'm going to use it, how I'm going to convert it into a strategy which will actually give me a business outcome. Because if it does not give me a business outcome, this is a very interesting piece of a educational institute lab output. I think I have done something which has never been done. I have written an algorithm which has never been written. It's very good. It's a very good academic scholar kind of stuff. But if it has to become commercialized, or if the people have to start using it, it should have a commercial value attached to it, and that commercial value will only come if somebody is able to use that output and convert it into some kind of a business decision making which will give them the greater results. And I think that's the two areas which are less invested on. If analytics has to become all pervasive, as all of us are saying, I personally see there's a lot of investment from the business angle, and the general managers will go in these two areas, which basically means my business leaders need to start thinking about analytics rather than the technology leaders to start thinking about analytics.
Yeah.
So even in general, I think, the invention of something actually starts first, and then the application of it comes much later. And recently I have seen many companies have started collaborating with top level research labs and actually buying patents of different new discovery and new products. And then the productization of that actually comes based on how much imagination power you have and what you actually want to generate out of that research topic. But yes, I mean, that is anyway happening in many industries. Many companies are actually doing that, collaborating with Harvard Business School or other research labs. And they're buying the patents of those IP and then actually productizing it at down the line for after a few years.
And that imagination power will define the analytics quotient of that group. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a corollary of all of this is that individuals who could bridge that gap between a fairly intellectual algorithm and model and what a business person needs.
Right.
I think they're going to be in the
big demand. Absolutely,
right?
undoubtedly.
So either we retool ourselves to be that bridge ourselves,
right,
or somebody will come and fill that gap who will be integrator between the decision sciences, data sciences, analytics group and the business and be the interpreter in there.
Yeah. Right. To Vasant, which actually Vasant said in the beginning, and if I can just take a second. So 2 years back or 3 years back, what we needed from an analytics community of people like us is the people who can write good models, people who can perhaps play with data well, people who know basic technology. Today, I need them, but that's considered to be given. Where the people in the next 2 years are going to be in great demand is what Sanjay actually said just now. The people who can actually use that model into business. People actually can buy patent from the lab and actually find out the application for that.
Yes.
And I think that's an area which is in big demand. So even if you guys are thinking of figuring out what are the new skills you need to acquire, that's the skill which will have far higher demand in the next 2-3 years than perhaps simply knowing how to make a dashboard on a Tableau. That skill is good, but that skill is going off demand. That's the way I will perhaps put it right here.
And in many ways, there's nothing new in what we are saying, right? The fact that you need to understand the business and contextualize the answers and the solutions to that business, which is why I guess the sexiest job of the century, as people have called it, right, it should be actually the decision scientist rather than the data scientist, because how you use that data to make the decision is actually going to be the more critical role than being a pure data scientist. So it's not really about the Hadoop or the R's of the world, but it's more about ultimately, how do you make more money? How do you make the customers more loyal? And that's the trend that we need to move,
I think
really
that's
focus on.
what differentiates the machine and the human brain, because machine probably will give you the most optimal result, where human beings don't always look at the most optimal result. Many a time we actually prefer the suboptimal results. So, as the earlier discussion where it is a driverless car, and probably looking at my shopping list and looking at my preference and the loyalty program that I have to redeem, the car might have taken me to some place, but I know if I go to a different place, I know probably I'll get to meet some other friends, and that would have been actually my suboptimal result, which human brain will take the thing. So I think decision making, probably will take long time machine to really catch up, because human brains are not always optimal. Don't look for the most top optimal results.
Yeah, most optimal versus most practical.
Yeah, most optimal versus most practical.
Good way to put that. I'm keenly aware of the time that we have, and at this point I want to take a pause and open up the forum for questions from audience.
There's one there.
So this was a very interesting discussion. I wanted to use some anecdotal information. Recently I read that the biggest challenge or the biggest risk to a driverless car, and Google has been trying this near their campus, is a car with a driver, right? Because it's the unpredictability of the car with a driver that the driverless car cannot anticipate. The question is, is there a need to change the conversation from predictive analytics to more responsive analytics? And there's another piece of information. Apple, even after 7 or 8 years of having a very successful product, the iPhone, it still is not able to predict the demand pattern. You always hear that there were supply constraints somewhere in their supply chain, where because of which there were certain deficits. So, and Apple obviously has all of the resources to come up with the best kind of predictive tools. Is there a need for a change in the conversation from a predictive way of looking at the world to a more responsive way?
So let me take that. It's a question of, is there a change from being a predictive way of looking at the world to a responsive way, right? I think it's back and forth. There is no static view. That is my personal opinion. There will not be a static view of how you look at the world. It used to always be responsive, and then we moved towards predictive because we said we want to be better prepared and then respond. And that is where the whole prescriptive analytics comes in, right? But getting outside of the jargon that we always use is, I think the fact that it is going to be iterative in that sense, right? Because you will need to respond based on the prediction and the preparation you have done. And then events also are not static. The events that unfold after you take a particular action will also evolve over time. And hence your ability to predict and respond continuously changes as well. So I don't think there will be one view of how you must approach a particular problem or from a business standpoint or from an individual standpoint. It will be interactive, it will be iterative, and it will always move from predictive to responsive because ultimately you want to be better prepared and in a better position to understand what's happening in your environment. You will never be able to completely predict because by definition a model is flawed. It is not real life. It is trying to simulate what happens in real life. So there will be flaws, and that is why the iteration is very, very critical.
Yeah.
That would be my view.
I would probably add to that to say that the way I would look at it, there would be different time zones on which you would be responsive and in which you would be predictive. So at the moment of truth, when the actual action is going to happen, it's more likely a response that the machine or the model or whatever has to throw up. But if you look out in terms of forecasting, what will happen, what will the traffic look like, what will if you are an airline optimizing your network, you respond in say a window of 6 hours and below, but you can predict your traffic beyond that. So I think depending on what the problem is, it will be a mix of in which time zone response is more appropriate and in which time zone you can use prediction to optimize your business. That's what I would say.
I think just to add to this point, and I have a slightly different view on that. See, when we talk about prediction, and specifically in the real life, and when the humans are involved, you are talking the prediction into two parts, right? So there are, and all of us understand how the analytics language. So there are two types of variable we deal with. The one variables are the rational variable, which can slightly be easily defined as and can have some level of measurement which I can bring into that. And there's a lot of irrational variable which comes on how I'm going to respond, right? Which is much more difficult to define it. Now, why perhaps agree with what Vasant was saying, that it's an iterative process. So you have a lot of information about some of the rational variables. So perhaps you can define it up to 60% well or 65% well, or maybe even less or more, depending on which kind of problem you are looking at or which kind of prediction you are looking at. So that will help you to start the iteration. But ultimately, how the response is going to happen, that's far more irrational part of it rather than the rational part of it, which based on all the responses which you have given in the past will try to define it in some way. And model being a model, it's as somebody actually said, it's flawed. I mean, if I can predict with a very high accuracy, then I should be sitting in the God seat, not here. I mean, it's a fairly simplistic statement. I don't think there's anybody on all of us have been students of statistics in some part of our life. There's a difference between simulation and the actual prediction, and the simulation is flawed, whether we like it or not. That only gives me some kind of a trending, and that's why it's an iterative process which will keep on working. And that's why perhaps Apple will never know whether success will sell or not.
And that's really where AI comes in, right? Because AI is responding to, as events, as you take a decision and the events then respond to it, the algorithm needs to, in real time, respond to the responses that it's getting, right? So that is where the iteration comes in. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
The audience, the panelists are going to be available. You could speak with them offline as well. Can we have some more questions?
Yeah. This is actually truly a Bangalorean's question. May actually apply to the entire India as well. We are perennially out of power. Our traffic flows are incredibly complex. Okay, and the last one essentially our coverage area of the cellular networks is exceptionally poor in some portions. If you look at it, these are really very complex problems. But I don't know today, what is it that's being done to address more from a I just asked from a Bangalorean perspective, but really for India, these are three big problems, definitely. If you discount the cellular networks, but at least the other two ones are largely affecting a billion plus population, right? Perennial shortage of power, traffic forces because it adds to more fuel consumption, adds a lot of pressure on the economy, and through oil imports, etc. All of it. How is analytics helping in order to solve these really very complex problems that India is facing today?
I think I can take it up. Yeah. And one of the solution to your question is why Modi has announced for 100 new cities. I mean, see, when these cities like Bangalore, Calcutta, or these metros has started, it's like really many years back, and probably prediction, was not as well to cater the today's requirement. So, if we keep on thinking that, I mean, obviously we can, through some analytics, we can monetize it, make it much more optimal, but beyond a certain level, you cannot stretch that threshold. So I think the solution is, therefore announcing of new 100 new cities, developing those, and therefore dispersing the huge crowd from here to the nearby and the hub and spoke other places, so that your standard of living and all this infrastructure could be far better and lifestyle could be far better.
I'm also happy to respond to your, I think we will break it up into two parts, right? So some questions don't need analytics for the answers, right? If the question is about power problems, then we don't need any analytics to tell us that we need more power, so you need more power plants and stuff like that. The problem is more a distribution issue and a loss of transmission issue rather than, how do you fix the power problem? Because that answer is fairly simplistic. From a traffic management standpoint, the UPSs and the DHLs of the world are already doing traffic optimization, we all know, because they have no choice but to deliver the packages, and therefore they need to do optimization on how do I best reach there, shortest time, lowest cost, etc. From an individual standpoint who are also part of that traffic, we don't do that kind of optimization, but today Google does provide us real-time information, and in our minds we are using some kind of optimization to figure out how do I go, when do I go there, do I delay my travel or not, and things like that. So in some ways, some analytics is already happening at organization as well as in individuals level. But to answer your point, certainly there is a lot of scope for analytics in all of these, which is where the whole smart cities, smart grid, and all of that is under consideration.
Okay.
So the discussion for the session was around key trends in analytics. You guys touched on it like for the first 3-4 minutes, and it kind of went on a tangent in terms of the operational challenges, the nuances of the organization and whatnot. So I wanted to actually get back to some of the basic questions, which is around in your respective industries or verticals, do you see the trend around connected digital that is transforming the way you guys conduct business? Not maybe today, but eventually down the line. Is digital transformation, and how are you guys thinking something along those lines in terms of monetizing the data that you're seeing from different touch points? And are you also seeing these device vendors coming together in terms of standardizing into how they're collecting and processing the data? Because one of the huge challenges in the connected world is that every device manufacturer have their own proprietary data structures, and there is no way to correlate one touch point with another touch point. So do you see the industry coming together in terms of standardizing that data collection, data infrastructure portion of, in terms of helping the digital transformation in your respective industry?
He was asking today, first of all, is the digital transformation, is that something you see across industries? Secondly, multiple touch points, different form factors, how do you connect them across different open source software?
So, I mean, in digital transformation, the way it is happening, I'm not very sure. So maybe I'm not the correct person.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is digital transformation disrupting our industry? I can talk from BFSI and my previous experiences. The answer is absolutely yes. What is it doing? It's reducing the time I have as a business to respond to my customers' needs. It's making giving me tons of data that I can use to get back to customer, understand their preferences, and I'm having to build up my whole business process and technology stack to even actually get that data in and make sense out of it. I'll have other panelists respond.
So I think I agree with you. So the digital transformation is fairly pervasive right now across industry. I don't think there's anyone who is not talking about it. There are few who are doing it. The other guys are still trying to figure out how to do it, purely because of the reason which you said yourself, that a lot of companies and the corporates are working on the legacy system, the data structures are different, their protocols are different, and they don't know how they're going to merge it or what is they're going to do if they merge it. That's one challenge which they're struggling with. But yes, it's a fairly pervasive. I think it's very much happening all over the place. That's one. I think second, is there industry level approach to come to a standard data structure or standard protocols, or I haven't seen it too much, But what's happening interestingly is that the protocols by itself is taking a backseat, because ultimately I'm interested in the data which you have. I'm not interested in which it's been stored. And with the newer technology and the new way of computing, I can play with multiple data structures at one go. All right, so I think that's where it's changing. That's one. The world is going to become connected. Data is being collected quite a lot. Means many of you will be wearing a wearable, which will collect data which even we don't know what all it's collecting. So I think I will not be amazed that there will be someone in this room 1 or 2 years down the line who knows more about me than I know myself. 100%. I will not be amazed at all. But the fact of the matter is that, is there an industry standard for it? Right now, no. I haven't. There are a lot of people talking about it, but I haven't seen something which is coming into existence. We say this is the industry standard, this is how the data should be stored, this is how it's going to happen. But having said this, the protocols have become too recessive. We can actually pull data from multiple systems and integrate and work very quickly. That's changed also the way why there's no need for that industry body. I think there is regulation which is required for sure, what data to store, where to share, where not to store. That's very, very important, a regulatory body on data globally, but as of now, it's only on talks. I haven't seen something coming up.
Yeah, I agree. And you asked a question about standardization. I agree with Amit. There is a need, but I'm not sure if it will happen for multiple reasons. Even more simple problems like data quality and missing data itself is a problem that will never go away. It will, whatever we do, it will be there. That is the nature of business. So to that extent, standardization is going to be more and more difficult. The other point I just wanted to quickly put out is the whole concept of data fatigue. I think that is also something that will happen. I'm sure each one of us knows at least one person who says, I switched off my WhatsApp and I switched off my Facebook, right? There is a lot of data, and at some point, a point will come where you will say, now, let's stop this, and you need to make more sense out of it rather than creating more and more data. So I think that's another trend I personally will put my money on as something that will happen.
I completely agree with you. I mean, it's like very crazy that you wake up in the morning and try to find out how well you slept based on the wearable data. This is crazy. It's literally crazy, but I do that, and I'm sure a lot of people do that.
I think that at the end, next night will give you the difficult time. Last night I didn't sleep well. This night I should sleep well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So very good example. The very good example to what you said is how Twitter is taking over the actual news sites. So the news that usually comes after a day, it breaks out by the neighbor, I think in a minute or two, and it spreads out from there.
Absolutely.
Hello, just one question. I'm Sunil Shirvaikar, professor in statistics at NMIMS University. My question is regarding talent development. Now, when it comes to like my course, Master in Statistics, what we try to do is we give students internships with companies, train them on software, statistical software, case studies, etc., to make them sort of employable in analytics space. Now, my specific question was related to the insight experience talent which is required. And as we saw, reskilling is very much required. The technology is changing, and a lot of business context, domain knowledge required. So a lot of requirements are there for job roles in analytics in the company. Now, how do companies take this decision of talent advancement and giving that opportunity? Because you may not have a ready person available with an experience of statistics and knowledge and IT skills and all that, as we know, the kind of requirement. So, how do companies internally take those decisions of talent, search, or is it internally or is it externally you want the ready-made person? What is generally currently the sort of strategy for talent acquisition is what I want to do.
So is this for anybody specific or?
Not specific, but specifically in the corporate sector. I mean,
So I can maybe go first. So I think the way we would look at it, obviously there is the clear first rules of filtering, which is, do you know the basic school, tools, basic technologies, basics of business and domain, etc. But that is more of filtering criteria more than a hiring criteria. For hiring, my view is slightly different. My view is it's all about having investing and betting on the right individual. Does he have the hunger to learn? Does he have the hunger to understand and solve? He or she have the hunger to solve a business problem, to really upskill himself and keep evolving. that attitude is the more critical element than the skill, is my view. So I think for colleges as well, that should be the hiring criteria when you try and give admissions to students, is people with the right attitude. From an organization standpoint, at least that's the philosophy we try to follow, which is you hire for the attitude rather than the skill. The skill can be taught, attitude cannot be. That's my view. Yeah.
I think there could be another side of it. I absolutely agree that attitude is most important than the skill sets already developed. But also from the institute perspective, there could be a couple of courses which could be more dynamic and fluid based on that year's current trend. And probably, you may choose from the practitioners who are actually practicing those dynamic new stuffs, come and actually teach your students. Or maybe at the end of every class, every topic that you finish, there could be one practitioner coming up and giving the example how those technologies are actually being used in today's world, so that the students that are coming out, they at least have a fair sense of what it is and they are not absolutely blunt on the face of the new things. So both the things actually should once again go in a collaborative fashion. And
so one advice to you being a professor, I think one small request. In our curriculum, we revise our curriculum every 10 years or 12 years. We perhaps need to start doing it every 2-3 years. Because the things are changing now so rapidly. If we really want our universities to produce something which is fairly well accepted in the corporate, I think we also need to look at it, how quickly we revise our curriculum and become more interesting.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, this is not for the statistics course, but in general, I would say that if we teach our students curious questioning, that will do a whole lot of good. And if we teach them to be good storytellers, the education system, unfortunately, the way we have all grown up, we have all been, taught to be very competitive, very sort of black and white. But the corporate world is very ambiguous. You've got to make sense of what you're trying to do with the numbers. So, in addition to what my fellow panelists said, I would say curious questioning and storytelling. Those are the courses that we have to have in some form or fashion in the curriculum.
Thanks. In fact, this course I was talking about Master in Statistics course at MIT. And we have done a lot of revamping of the course to make it quite industry-centric. And like you suggested, the case study, the presentations by the industry speakers, and doing certain project work with the industry. So this, and like you said, every 2-3 years we are doing that syllabus change.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question more on the strategy and business side. How would you grow your business? Would you prefer to build or would you prefer to buy businesses? I have a couple of questions specifically to AASHU and UJJYAINI. Hypothetical situations. AASHU, if a private equity firm invested around 200 million in a firm, would you prefer to buy or would you prefer to build internally? UJJYAINI, similarly, given the resources that Bharti has at its disposal, would you choose to buy companies or would you prefer to grow internally?
So buying a company, I think nowadays it's not the trend of like buying a company. I think it's more about buying the data set that company has. So if you see if Flipkart has acquired MITRA, they might not have acquired it because they are into same, the composition of business is same. I think nowadays the companies that are acquiring other companies, they are mostly for the user data set that other company has. And if you ask for our company, I would say that still we are in the startup zone, so I'm not thinking about that acquiring or buying out a company. But certainly, if it happens, it will be certainly for the kind of skills and the data that company has instead of the resources or anything else.
I think buying companies is more from the buying talents than just buying the company per se. So I think once again a dual model or a hybrid model can really work. There are times when we grow our own talents internally, and there are times when we know that there is a talent existing outside. There is no point building that up once again. Why don't we actually get that, plug it in, and so that we gain the pace out of it. So it's a more hybrid model, and like internal business need to take a decision on it.
We'll request further questions to be taken offline in the interest of time. We're already running a little behind schedule. We'd like to come back on track. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all our panelists. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay, for fantastically moderating that session for us. Can we have a huge round of applause of them? Thank you.